to the next episode of the Backstory on Marketing and AI. And if you haven't already done so, please visit prorelevant.com and sign up for all of these episodes and podcasts. I am the author of the upcoming book, The AI Marketing Machine, and you can find out more information on that at marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. Today I'm interviewing Andy Swick of Hubbub, and he has a fascinating story, and he's doing some really cool stuff, and looking forward to our conversation here. So he is the co-founder and CEO of Hubbub, which is an AI-powered concierge platform transforming client entertainment. A seasoned entrepreneur and an AI thought leader, he's built and exited multiple ventures, raised over 5 million, and mentors startups in Chicago. His insights on tech, work, and wellness reflect a deep passion for innovation and balance. How can you go against that? I mean, work-life balance and then the fun part of innovation. Andy, welcome. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, how did you get involved in this AI and marketing opportunity and space here?
So at Hubbub, obviously, we do a fair amount of marketing, content marketing. We're an early stage startup, but I've also dealt with it at other companies in a more labor intensive way. And AI is really disrupting the space dramatically. So it's a natural. Anybody building a startup is resource constrained and time limited in many ways. And so AI is a natural solution to a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And and you're so right about a startup and, being resource constrained. Wouldn't it be great if somebody just gave you millions and millions to spend on marketing and really get the ball rolling? But you never ever have enough money in marketing, I don't think.
No, you never have enough money for that or other things, but definitely marketing and sales. You can always find more ways to spend it, but it's probably good to be resource constrained. So it's like a diamond. It gets polished by friction, and I think that's true of a lot of startups that you get polished through friction, and that friction is constrained resources,
Yeah, well, and it certainly makes you make the right decisions, or
or try to.
as near. Yeah, well, that's a good point. At least to try to make the right decisions. Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing that's happening though right now, and just to kind of change the subject a little bit, is that, and I don't know whether AI is being overhyped or not, but and there's certainly some limitations to it. So where do you kind of see that? Is AI being overhyped, and what do you see as its realistic limitations?
So I think it is being overhyped, and it's being overhyped by some very well-known, famous people, famous entrepreneurs, even, or people who would run very large public companies, who you would think would have a better understanding. I won't name any names, but I think talk of super intelligence, or depending what that means, it's never really well defined. But I guess we can assume that it means something smarter than the smartest human, right? Or artificial general intelligence. You'll hear some people say AGI. It depends what you mean by that. But if you mean like an autonomous robot that acts like Data on Star Trek and acts like a human, no. There's a lot of reasons, and they're very scientifically based for why that's not possible with a computer. But on the good side, I think the talk of this being as revolutionary as electricity, I think is probably and other things that have been just as revolutionary, I think is probably accurate. Just as a shovel allows you to be more productive and dig holes faster and more holes, AIs are going to make us be able to be a great deal more productive. They're going to reduce the cost of a lot of things. Some jobs I think will get eliminated. They'll be automated out, which is not, it's nothing new. I mean, there's nobody milling flour by hand anymore, and there's nobody, shoeing horses unless they really want to, right? Or doing blacksmithing unless they really want to. It's not a career anymore. So, but I don't think anybody sees that as a bad thing. Capital just flows into other more productive areas and creates even more jobs. There's a lot of jobs today that didn't exist 10 years ago, from selling things on eBay and Amazon to Uber drivers to social media influencers.
Yeah, and it's funny that you brought up Uber. A lot of the taxi drivers in New York are now Uber drivers. So it was kind of a shift, but certainly when you think about the value that Uber provides to the riding public, the ride sharing public, it's enormous. And in a similar way, I think AI did the same thing, certainly in marketing, but probably overall in any of the knowledge working kinds of positions, it's making us all faster, better, and cheaper, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's staggering how fast it snuck up on us. And I think there's still some room for improvement. If I had to guess, we're probably as far, I don't know, better than half the way there, maybe even 75% of the way there as far as how good these LLMs can get with current computer architecture. Quantum computing might change some of that, but that's at least
Mm.
minimum years out. But it's just been staggering how fast it's moved.
Yeah, yeah. The one of the objections to AI though is, and a friend of mine, he brings them up. Of course, he's also doing and starting to do quite a bit in AI. But he brings up things like MySpace and Second Life, and those were supposed to take over the world, so to speak, and they're gone. Also MySpace now, of course, is Meta, and some of the other social platforms, and then Second Life. I don't know if Second Life has died, but certainly now, I think AI. You've just got to be in it. I think AI has proven itself in the short time it's been around that it is really a game changer and reduce costs. Make things faster, better, and cheaper. So.
Yeah, and MySpace is gone, but digital networks are not gone. Social networks are not gone. They've just been somebody did a better job
Hmm.
than MySpace ever did. I don't know if you remember MySpace. I don't think MySpace ever had a news feed. That was a brilliant innovation on the part of Zuckerberg, or likes and stuff like that. So I think that's really, he just built a better mousetrap. When you think about AI in general, it's really mimicking, it's a brilliant parrot. It mimics human vision. But it doesn't replicate it. It mimics it. We don't see the same way. We're certain we don't see the same way that a Tesla sees the road, where they're using addition and subtraction computation to mimic human vision. Same thing with the second thing is speech, both oral and written human speech. These AIs are mimicking it, but there's no understanding. I remember a famous Diamantis, a real famous West Coast VC, saying about a year ago, he said, somebody, we passed the Turing test and nobody seemed to notice. And, but the truth is, it turns out the Turing test turned out to not be a good test. Turing said, if you could talk to a computer or something like that and not be able to tell that's a computer, you could assume it's understanding. Well, it turns out that's not true. The computer doesn't understand. It's just mimicking. It doesn't, we don't even know. And there's some nuts and bolts things about these LLMs that we don't know. Like, for instance, we don't know how an LLM makes a correlation between Michael Jordan and basketball. We think it's in the perception layer, but we're not 100% sure how that's even happening. But we know it's not understanding it. There's just a probability matching up in the database layer. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the scary part of it too, is that it is kind of like, well, what's the next most probable word? And that's one thing. Certainly, it's advanced past that. But then that advancement, though, is kind of like a structure. It seems like that somebody has developed, and so that structure is really taking the intelligence of somebody else and kind of forming it around or force feeding it around the answers so that they really look like they're very intelligent. Yet in reality, they're just following some form that somebody else programmed into it.
Yeah, I mean, there's several thought experiments that are well known. There's one called the Chinese room, and it's constructed this way. You have a person sitting in a room with a filing cabinet full of Chinese and its language, when it's English correlates. Somebody walks up to the room, can't see in the room, slides something in Chinese under the door. The person inside the room takes it, uses the filing cabinet, doesn't understand Chinese, but he's able to use the code in the filing cabinet to translate it into English and slide it back under the door. So the person that receives that on the outside assumes, well, whatever's inside that room understands Chinese. It doesn't. And a good example of a Chinese room in real life is the Watson computer built by IBM that won Jeopardy and has, beat Peter Kasparov in chess and things like that. It's a giant Chinese room. It doesn't understand anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just makes correlation. Computers are decent and this includes the LLMs. There's three types of reasoning. There's induction, there's deduction, and there's abduction. They're decent at induction, which is taking data and looking for patterns. They used to be terrible. That's gotten a lot better. They used to make a correlation between like the weather in Wyoming and a certain stock, and a human knows there's no reason to believe that's a valid correlation. They've gotten better at realizing that, and so they do that reasonably well. Deduction is taking a known pattern or theorem or equation and deducing what the pattern is, and making, extrapolating and making predictions.
Mm.
They're okay at that, but they're not as good as they are with pattern matching. And a good example is a math problem like a geometric series or infinite series, something that is not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. It requires some reasoning and choosing which is the best theorem to use in path. And sometimes you just graph an estimated answer. They're not that great at that sort of deduction. And I don't know if they're getting better and might get quite good at that. But the third type is abduction. And that is basically an educated guess. And it's been shown that that's non-computable. And by non-computable, it means it cannot be solved algorithmically, and computers only work algorithmically. And I hear objections like, well, it's a probabilistic instead of a deterministic machine. Well, that's only the database layer. It's using probabilities to make associations in the database layer. It's still running an algorithm to produce, to process the human's, whatever it is, prompt, and then produce output. It's still, using an algorithm. And some things cannot be solved algorithmically. And we've known that since Alan Turing's paper on computable numbers in 1935 or 36, where he showed that mathematically there's something called the halting problem that a computer is incapable of ever solving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you're right. I think and I like the way you broke it down into those three classes there. But let's get back to more mundane things. So tell us about Hubbub, and when your position kind of as an AI-driven concierge. What do you mean by that, and how do you leverage AI to really drive the business and value for your clients?
So we automate business client entertainment. We're basically a SaaS platform for that, and that includes everything from customized recommendations that based on your purchase history through notifications, calendaring, ride share, payment, all the way through populating your CRM tool and your expense report. And the way to think about it is it's sort of your own personal assistant, but in digital form that handles. So if you're somebody who's taking clients on a weekly basis, or even multiple times a week to ball games and dinners and stuff, that's a very time consuming task. And a lot of people who do that don't have an executive assistant. They have to do it themselves. It's very time consuming. And maybe they're also going to an unfamiliar city where they need recommendations, and they'd rather not ask their client for recommendations. So we're making something available that was to the masses, or to more people at least, that was only available to the well-to-do or maybe even the C-suite. And a correlate to this is when you into the broader AI world, you can think of the coming cyber cab as being your own chauffeur, something only the rich could afford. You can think of LLMs in the near term being your own personal tutor, something only the rich could afford. And then with these robots from Figure and Optimus from Tesla that might be able to clean your house and cook your food, now you can see a future where almost everybody can have their own personal chef and maid, right?
Mm.
So in that same vein, we think people are going to want their own personal assistant, the equivalent of a person following them around with a notepad and handling the mundane tasks of life, even beyond business client entertainments, scheduling your haircuts, arranging your dog walker, arranging a massage, all the calendaring and payment and scheduling and stuff like that nobody really likes to do, and coordinating. If you're going in a group activity, then there's even more coordinating
Yeah.
to do, calling up and following up and people dropping in and dropping out, all of that. That's how we fit into the broader AI picture, I think.
Yeah, well, and that is, and you're so right too. The amount of time it takes, especially when you have a group, and they're not on a group calendar or whatever, and you're trying to figure something out, and everybody's got an opinion, and oh, I can't make it that day, but I can make it this day,
Yep.
and yeah, that's definitely something I think that AI, if you have an AI agent working for you, that you could talk to that AI agent, so to speak, and then the other AI agents could talk to themselves and
Yeah.
figure out, something that really makes sense.
Right.
So.
only the rich and the celebrities can afford that right now, but everybody will have it in the near term.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I'm ready. I'm definitely ready. So, that's kind of the conventional side of things. What about the unconventional piece of business advice you want to give somebody on when you're thinking about launching a new startup and stuff like that? What kind of advice and what kind of unconventional advice would you give?
The first thing I would say is think about something that affects you personally, a problem that affects you personally, or a friend or a family member. And what that's called is founder market fit. And it's important to have that because you're whatever solution you're going to come up with is probably going to change at least two or three times, maybe even more. And also maybe your go-to-market strategy and other things beyond the solution will change. And to be able to persevere and stick that out, and you really have to feel fairly strongly about solving that problem. Otherwise, you're just going to give up. It doesn't make sense to persevere with something you just don't care that much about. The other advice I would say is once if you don't have it in your family or you're not a serial founder, find mentors, find groups, do networking, join accelerators. There's all kinds of stuff in Chicago that I'm here a part of that you can learn from people who have seen the movie before and they know how to solve the problem and they're happy to help for no cost. You'd be surprised for a lot of these guys, these serial entrepreneurs. It's like they're instead of golfing, they like helping founders.
Well, yeah, and then they've definitely got, the College of Hard Knocks behind them. So,
Right. Exactly.
and I think that's a big thing. If you can weed out 50 or 70% of the mistakes that you might otherwise make, that leaves so much more time and money and opportunity to make things right.
There's one more thing I would add that I think is a really key ingredient, and that is there's a notion of a vitamin versus a pill in the startup world. And vitamins are okay. I don't want to say that they're always something to avoid if you feel strongly about it. But a vitamin is something that's nice to have. So if you forget to take your vitamin C one day, you're going to be okay, right? But if you forget to take your heart medication or something more, or maybe even insulin or something like that, that's a pain now. That's a big problem. Or
Mm.
you've got a migraine and you need a Tylenol. That's a pain. And there's something called switching costs whatever product or service you're building. People are, Daniel Kahneman wrote that book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he talks about system one and system two. And system one is pretty much autopilot. System two requires a ton of energy. Like to do arithmetic, you have to use system two. You can't do that subconsciously, right? So to get people out of system one and to switch, you've got to be solving something painful. Generally speaking, not always. Like I said, there's some vitamins that do succeed. And so as you think about your product and your solution, think about how am I going to overcome the switching cost? What pain can I solve for people? And it doesn't even have to be, it can be just something that gets the initial flywheel going. And it doesn't have to be a long-term thing. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Uber, when they first started, they're targeting delivery drivers in San Francisco with downtime and businessmen or business people who got out of a meeting, didn't have time to look for a hotel to find a cab. All the cabs are by the hotels, right? So now they can push a button on a phone. Delivery drivers who's got some downtime between rides can earn some extra money. They're solving a serious pain point for both sides. Another example is Amazon. When they first started, they were selling books, of course, but their target customer was antiquarian booksellers. These were people who had a severe pain point. They had to go through dusty bookstores, look for books they thought they could sell, cart them home, pay for them. Now they could just go online and pick them out. So the people selling them, they could sell more books to these antiquarian booksellers. And these booksellers are buying more books, obviously, than the average person. The average person's buying maybe, 4 or 5 a year at the most. These guys are buying hundreds a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how they got the flywheel going. The third example I always give, and these are kind of B2B examples. Facebook initially was a .edu. You had to have a .edu email address. They would go from university to university. They customize the website to that university. They put the course list on there. They'd have a big opening day with beer and balloons, and then they would just go around and they'd pick up 2,000 users that way. That got the flywheel going. And what pain point were they solving for those users? Those people wanted to know whether so and so was dating somebody else without having to ask them and get embarrassed. So they could just go look now. And that's the biggest problem for that age group, right? Is so and so available? So and that got the flywheel going. Now, I mean, that's almost a minuscule amount of the users using Facebook for that. Right.
Yeah, 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 funny.
So
Well,
think
but
about that when you're trying to start.
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's certainly, when you think about where a company starts and that initial problem that they've got and how it evolves, it is pretty incredible. I mean, it was pretty surprising when Amazon, moved out of just books and into everything, and now they're
Yeah.
into everything.
Yeah.
And then they bought stores. They bought Whole Foods, and now they've got,
Yeah.
brick and mortar instead of just only online.
Yeah. And Amazon Go.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the big early mistakes that founders make?
Those not thinking about your go to market, assuming that if you, first of all, not talking to your customers, not thinking that if you build it, they'll just come. And not only building it, but not building it in a, there's something called the lean startup method. You want to build something minimal and testable rather than building the whole mousetrap. You want to see if you can solve some very small problem and then expand from there and make sure you're right. So you don't waste a lot of time, effort, and money building something that just nobody wants. So build something, first talk to customers before you build anything. And if you can do something, using what they call the Wizard of Oz method, do it and don't build anything. And you saw that with like Cameo and Groupon, for instance. Like Cameo, they didn't, or even Airbnb didn't provide payment transactions when they first started. They were just displaying pictures. Groupon, you had to go to a web form and submit a web form, and they were just testing whether or not people would actually buy things this way. There's that famous story about that shoe store that's in Vegas now, and they were bought by Amazon. I forgot the name of it. High-end shoe store though.
Oh, it's is a started with a Z, I think.
Zappos. Is
Yeah,
it
Zappos. That's it.
Zappos? They first started. What they did, they went to a Nordstrom's, took a picture of the wall, took it and put it on a website, and said, "Would you buy any of these?" And they got orders. So then they had to run down to Nordstrom, buy the shoes, and mail them. But it proved that yeah, people will buy, particularly
Yeah,
will buy shoes online. Groupon showed that, and so that's called the Wizard of Oz method. If you can do that, even better. If you have to build more, then so be it. Then build more, but build the minimum. Test it, and don't be wedded to it. Get feedback. Be willing to pivot, and then I would say the third biggest mistake is people will get maybe some early sales, and they'll think they hit a home run, but they haven't really thought about their go to market. They haven't thought about their
yeah,
cost of
yeah,
acquisition. They haven't thought about their long term value. Where do their customers live? Maybe there was some low hanging fruit that they got, but okay, that's great. But now, how do you get your next 1,000 customers? Where do you find them, and how do you market to them, and what kind of language converts them? What converts them?
right.
And that's probably the next biggest mistake: getting some initial success and not really thinking about your go to market.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because the first one or two customers, typically they're your friends, they're your very close
Oh
contacts,
yeah,
and
yeah,
hey, I got them. We're helping them out, we're doing all this great stuff.
yeah,
And then, I call it like the 10, 100, 1,000 is okay. Well, now how do you turn those friends into the next 10 customers? And then
yeah.
how do you turn those 10 into 100 and the 100 into 1,000? That process is very difficult.
Right.
I mean, you can get lucky. Some products, it's just you get lucky, but for most startups, it's very hard to go from that, 1, 10, 100,000.
A lot of people make the simple mistake thinking, well, I'll just do some social media advertising, or I'll do some
Yeah.
SEM, or I'll just have events. That's one. I love that one.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have
Yeah.
events. Unless you're giving a lot of free stuff away at those events, you're
Yeah,
probably not going to
exactly.
get that many people.
I'm just here for the free lunch, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, so you gotta really understand, and that comes down to empathizing. It really in the bottom line, sales is empathizing. Sales and marketing is empathizing with your customer
Right.
and understanding the problem, and then listening to what they tell you. I get all kinds of people trying to sell me stuff through LinkedIn or whatever, and I tell them no, and they almost never ask for why or feedback, or I responded to you. I might give you some answers, but almost never. That's a big mistake.
Yeah.
Always be learning, always try to empathize and understand your customer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So how do you think AI and certainly automation, but AI can help mid-market companies compete with larger companies?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of potential to punch above your weight with AI, right? Companies who are mid-market who want to compete with the Fortune 500, who's got endless margin and resources, basically. Now, much smaller companies, and that's a prime example with Hubbub. There's very large companies who, they employ an army of executive assistants who do this work for their Salesforce or their partners or whoever's doing the selling, right? Whether it's a big four accounting firm or a law firm or a Google or a Facebook. But the companies that are smaller and they can't afford that, now they can punch above their weight with this automation, and not just with marketing sales, but software development. Development that used to cost is probably dropped by half. Cost of software development is probably dropped by half with these LLMs, and it's probably going to drop another half,
Yeah.
and probably in 2026. So that's a huge expense for you. Still need engineers to implement, debug, and implement. The LLMs aren't going to implement it into your hosting provider and stuff like that, and then go fix bugs and stuff like that. But you need a whole lot fewer. Instead of 10 engineers, maybe you need two now. So smaller companies can punch above their weight now because of that.
Well, one thing I've always found, well, I don't know if always is a loaded term, but
Yeah.
the smaller companies are
In
always
marriage,
afraid of what's that?
in marriage and in business. Don't, don't say always to your spouse. You always do this. Don't say
Yeah, yeah,
that.
exactly. That one I got to write down. But it's funny because the small and mid-sized companies are always worried about the big companies, coming in and
Yeah.
destroying the market.
Yeah.
And the big companies are sitting there going, I wish we could decide and get moving as fast as those guys and pivot, and be agile. We just can't get there.
Yeah.
And there's a misperception on both sides. Well, maybe the perception, the misperception is the small thinking that the big guys are, going to take over the world. They certainly can. They have the money and the resources, and they can throw stuff at it. And but they just can't be agile. It is just not in their nature to be agile and pivot around whatever the new technology or new capabilities are.
A lot of times I think it's philosophy. It's the culture of the company. And you see that with Apple Computer, you see that with Tesla. Steve Jobs is always famous for saying, "Don't worry about disruption. Just cannibalizing our own products." You saw that with Kodak. They put digital photography on a shelf because they were worried about cannibalizing.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. That's the most famous example.
yep,
And he was saying, "Don't worry about it because if we don't cannibalize ourselves, somebody else will."
yeah.
So, but you have to, but that has to come from the C-suite. That has to come from leadership. They have to reinforce that. They can't be out on a golf course just not paying attention. They have to imbue that into the ethos of the
Mm.
company to be prepared and eager to cannibalize their own products, and whatever win should win. And then there's also a question of focus that comes from the C-suite. I remember seeing an interview not too long ago, a replay of an old interview of Elon Musk. I think he was on, maybe he might have been on 60 Minutes or 2020. It was a big program. And this was probably like 10 or 15 years ago when Tesla was, making very few cars. They were making the Model of roads. Maybe they were on the S or something by that point, but they were not at all a threat to Ford or
Right.
GM or anybody else. And the interviewer, whoever it was, I don't remember, asked him. He said, "Are you competing with? Is Ford a competitor? Is GM?" And he said, "Yes, they are." He said, and the interviewer said, "But they've got all these resources and people and money." And Elon Musk's response was, "Well, where's their electric car then?" He said, "It's not resources and money. It's focus. It's creating
Yeah.
a dedicated team to focus on the problem. And if you're minting money with F-150s or Cadillacs or whatever, and you're content with that, and you don't look over the horizon and see where things might go and put some effort and focus on that." Clay Christensen wrote some famous books about this. He's dead now, but died about 10 years ago, but he was an academic, and he wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, which is big on this. And then he came up with the jobs to be done method, if you've ever heard of that. Very influential guy. He influenced Steve Jobs quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny too, just your example there, you think Ford, they could build an electric, or GM, and of course, Elon's answer was perfect. But on the other hand, you take somebody that came out of that entrepreneurial mush or whatever, like Bill Gates, and he said, the browser has taken over our business, and he walked. I don't know who it was, but what I've heard is, he basically walked down the hall and says, you're coming with me, you're coming with me, started up a whole new thing, from one day to the next. And
Yeah.
that is the way that, if you want to be agile as a big company, you got to take that chance like that.
He created a skunkworks, and there's a lot of famous examples of that, from Henry Ford. With If you read about him in the around the turn of the century, he was making Model Ts, but he would block off an area in the factory and that nobody could see it, and only restricted to certain personnel, and that was their skunk work. They're working on the next iteration. You see that with the first Macintosh. Steve Jobs did that. He created a skunk works. He went to Xerox PARC.
Yeah.
He saw GUIs and he said, "This is the future." And he created a skunkworks, and they made a fantastic GUI. You see that there's a famous book. Well, maybe I shouldn't say famous, but it's a good book called Soul of a New Machine, and it's about DC. I think it's about DEC Corporation back in the mini computer days. They had a 32-bit machine that was super successful, and they got caught with their pants down. People were building 64-bit machines, which take 3 years to build, and they didn't have that much time. They're going to have a business, so they built a skunkworks, and they hired all these young guys who didn't know how long it took to build a new machine, and they just got it done in like 9 months. So, but
Yeah.
same solution. They built a skunkworks.
Yeah. Yeah.
IBM did that a little bit with their PC, kind of, when they were making mainframes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they built a skunkworks for their first PC.
Well, but then they hired, or we're trying to hire folks out of Microsoft to build their operating system,
Yeah,
their PC DOS and stuff like that.
that didn't go well.
That
Yeah,
didn't go well, that's for
no,
sure.
no.
Well, Andy, we're coming down towards the end here. I do have one last question for you, and that is, what advice would you give an up and coming new marketer?
Empathy. Think about your customer. Think about their problem and empathize with them. And if they're not right for you, your product or service is not right for them, empathize with them and tell them that. That builds trust, and probably in the long run creates a better company, a greater environment, and more. And that customer might come back later. And that really comes from empathy. Feel their problems.
Yeah, yeah. Well, definitely that. And I guess even, if you're coming right out of college, is how do you empathize with the interviewer? Because, what's funny, when you think about the most important product that you're ever going to sell, it's yourself.
Yeah,
And when you
yeah,
get out of college,
yeah.
how do you do that? And I think, your point about that emotion is empathizing with the interviewer to make sure that, you can somehow understand what he wants, or he or she wants, and how you can then hopefully fit into that.
That's right. That's right. Think about it from their point of view. That's
Yeah.
true. So many things, even negotiations, buying a car, whatever. It's
Yep.
true. Things. Understand who you're buying from.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, anyway, Andy, thank you so much for participating today. And where can folks reach you to learn more about you and your company, Hubbub?
So you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Search under Andy Swick, CWIK. You'll also find me. We have a website, hubbub.me, it just spelled like it is behind me, HUBUB.me. We're not a .com, we're a .me.
Yeah, fantastic. So hubub.me.
That's right.
Love it. Fantastic. Well, Andy, thank you so much again. And for the audience, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on marketing and AI. And if you'd like to find out more about my upcoming book, please go to marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. Andy, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Great talking to you.